Good afternoon. I am Claire Cox. I'm the chair of Georgia STOMP, a statewide coalition with reach of more than 50,000 in our state, addressing menstrual equity and the elimination of period poverty in Georgia.
And I'm Adele Stewart. I am the co-chair of Georgia STOMP and also a member of the Junior League of Atlanta. And we're so grateful to be able to share our story with y'all today.
Coalition building is hard work. A coalition, by definition, is a collection of groups and individuals who have different goals in other facets of their existence, but are brought together by common ground on one matter. As soon as the work begins, conflicting priorities insert themselves into every decision and potential path. Georgia STOMP is no different. We are assembling disparate groups around the common desire to eliminate menstrual inequities in Georgia and alleviate period poverty as much as possible. We work together, but at times have to chart courses of compromise because of what each group brings to the table. But how did we do this?
We're going to share that story with y'all today, and this is a story of many things. It is a story of learning on the fly, of collaboration, relationship building, definitely making some mistakes, but then learning from them, of expanding scope, and of pivoting, which is a word with which we're all familiar these days. But we hope that by sharing our story that others can maybe glean some things from our experience. And we, more importantly, hope that we will have more folks join us in working towards a more equitable society where menstruation is not a barrier. So with that, I will pass it over to Claire to let us start at the beginning.
So yeah, we will start at the beginning. It starts with Georgia Women and Those Who Stand With Us, which is a grassroots social welfare organization whose purpose is to raise a common voice about issues important to women and to our country. I was co-founder of that organization and its former president. We formed in January of 2017 following the Women's March on Washington, and Georgia Women grew in influence and membership very quickly. Outside of Atlanta, they remain one of the strongest voices for issues in our state. Georgia Women's core principles relate to protection of civil liberties, fair and representative elections, quality public education, access to affordable health care, and protection of the environment. In the middle of 2017, a Georgia Women member asked the question about why do we pay sales tax on feminine hygiene products? Georgia Women's Steering Committee discussed the idea and adopted the mission. We were fresh off a victory of obtaining paid parental leave for government employees of 3 Middle Georgia municipalities and had the naive notion that the tax elimination could be done just as quickly. This notion was reinforced when 3 of us met with our state representative, Representative Alan Peake, a Republican from Middle Georgia, and he immediately said, yes, I think this needs to be done. But he suggested we needed a woman to be our champion. As an aside, this is another example of why we need more women in government. Representative Peake was a valiant and supportive champion, but we had to find a woman to dedicate herself to the cause because he felt a woman would be more comfortable speaking about it. Through friends, we connected with Representative Debbie Buckner, a Democrat from Junction City, who became our bill's champion. Once we had the idea for a bill, we realized we had a lot to learn. How are period products taxed in Georgia? Could the tax be eliminated administratively? What body of the legislature, if it needs to go to the legislature, which body would it go before? How do you even do that? So we consulted and talked a lot with retired and current legislators, along with other experienced advocates, and they were some of our first teachers. We learned that our bill must be filed in the Georgia House because it's a revenue bill. So with 2 lead representatives, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, the bill was drafted. For bill language, we looked to other states to get sample language from what was being done and used in other parts of the country. We agreed on what would be included and what would be excluded. And Representative Buckner drafted the first bill. We obtained approval from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and Georgia STOMP's first tax elimination bill, House Bill 731, was filed in January of 2018.
At that point, the media jumped on the bill, which allowed for multiple groups to coalesce around the issue. I found out shortly after the bill dropped and brought it before my local Junior League of Savannah, of which I was a member and where I was living at the time. The issue directly aligned with the league's focus on issues relating to health, education, and the aid and protection of women and children, which are shared by many of the then 12 junior leagues across the state. And so it didn't take long for word to get up to the Junior Leagues of Georgia State Public Affairs Committee, who then decided to support the initiative. The Junior League has historically leveraged well-informed advocates across the state on select issues, and so their participation lent a fair amount of legitimacy to what some were calling an issue du jour. Now, for the Junior League and Georgia Women, as well as other organizations, we were asked to create resources for the folks who wanted to support the initiative. These talking points ensured that there was clear messaging when folks pictured here and many others went to the Capitol to advocate for House Bill 731. So this fact sheet was comprised of notes like, under current Georgia law, the menstrual hygiene products are taxed at full 4% state sales tax. Some products are exempt from state sales tax, like hearing aids and prosthetics, blood glucose test strips, and insulin syringes. These FDA Class 1 and Class 2 medical devices are unavoidable necessities, and there is no male equivalent. And finally, this is both an education and an economic issue. Menstruators across the state need these products in order to fully participate in school and work. That was our messaging that first year, and we leveraged both personal and advocacy connections to get the word out via anything we could get our hands on: phone calls, text messages, we use social media and email.
One of Georgia Women's chief sources of education and directed advocacy is something called Lynn's List, and it still goes on today. Each week, now president of Georgia Women, Lynn Snyder, gives a brief synopsis of various issues, followed by suggested scripts and contact information. Georgia Women also hosts signing events, periodic gatherings at a local brew pub where members write postcards on many of the same issues that were in Lynn's List. So both of these tools were used to target key legislators, committee members, and ultimately, when we got no movement with House Bill 731, the Speaker of the House and the governor. Talking points created for Georgia Women were shared with Junior League and others when advocacy days at the Capitol were held. And we tracked all of the contacts and information about elected officials in a common spreadsheet that we shared. So as I mentioned, in the 2018 session, the bill was House Bill 731. Many of you may know, but at the time we did not. The path to passage of a bill is very long. You get a bill champion to file the bill. We've mentioned that was Representative Buckner. We learned a revenue bill had to be filed in the House. You get a bill number. We had that. Then you get a fiscal report if it's going to affect the budget of the state. And so we got our fiscal report saying that sales tax elimination on menstrual products will affect the budget to about $9 or $10 million per year. Then you have a reading 1 in the House and a reading 2 in the House, and then you get other co-signers, and we tried to get an equal bipartisan co-signers of each. We had 3 Republican and 3 Democrats. Then it's assigned to a committee and a subcommittee, and we moved through all that really quickly, and then it stalled. It was a short session due to that it was an election year, and we met some unexpected opposition that year. Namely, some committee members saw it as a special tax break for women, not wanting to recognize that, of course, this is a tax primarily on women, or that not only women bleed and need these products. They also said that our conversation about it being an oversight at the time of tax eliminations, that we were saying it was an oversight because there weren't women in the room at the time the tax eliminations were decided, and they found that insulting and contended that it was not an oversight. So just ran into some opposition there that we did not expect. So following the end of the 2018 session, meeting more opposition than we naively expected in those early days, we regrouped, we researched, and we recommitted ourselves. We brought all the legislators and advocates to one table to discuss what went right, what went wrong, and how to enlist more people. We call that our first coalition summit. We continue to have these summits twice a year. We researched, and I've got to give my co-lead, Adele, a lot of credit in this area. Everything we could find or learn about efforts in other states, menstrual equity, which was a new term to us, period poverty. We talked to everyone and every group who might care about this issue. We were fortunate to get a lot of assistance from Helen Robinson, who was then at YWCA of Greater Atlanta, and they became the third coalition member organization.
In doing all of our research, we found an organization called the Alliance for Period Supplies, who hosted their first national conference on period leadership in Atlanta in October of 2018. And that meeting we considered to truly be a turning point for the organization. Leaders from all over the country were present, and a few attendees came with us. Representative Buckner attended, Claire and I came, and Dominique Holloman came who's from the Junior League of Douglas County. All of us were challenged to look beyond the tax elimination issue. We were thrilled to meet Jamie Lackey, the CEO of Helping Mamas, that's also in Atlanta, and learn from her about what she does as part of the Diaper Bank Network. But learn from the speakers there about so many of the issues facing menstruators, and came to understand how to really speak about these issues. So we learned things like the fact that feminine hygiene products actually refers to things like douches, while menstrual products is actually the appropriate term for pads, tampons, period underwear, cups, discs, etc. We learned that our state's emergency management agency, the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, didn't have menstrual products on its list of basic necessities that funds could be used to purchase after a natural disaster or an emergency. They are basic needs. That was surprising to us. We learned that a lack of period products has an effect on attendance in schools and in the workplace here in the United States, more so than we ever could have imagined. And that this not only is a barrier to receiving an education, but also distracts students from their education, even while they are attending school, to say the least. We learned about the barriers that are facing folks who are incarcerated and menstruate, that they often have limited access to menstrual products, if at all, and that the process for distributing products to folks who are incarcerated leads to shaming for those whose periods are heavier than others, or other forms of shaming or stigma, and the ways that those are perpetuated in prisons and jails. So we announced to the public and to our allied groups that we wanted to begin to address these inequity in multiple ways and begin to work to understand what could we actually tackle here in our state and how could we go about approaching that. So some of the things that we learned at the summit that we then wanted to share with others were things like definitions. What is menstrual equity? What is period poverty? The definition of menstrual equity primarily comes from Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, who wrote in her book that in order to have a fully equitable and participatory society, we must have laws and policies that ensure menstrual products are safe and affordable and available for those who need them. Now, in regards to period poverty, we've scoured the internet and scoured the resources and really like the American Medical Women's Association definition, which terms period poverty as the inadequate access to menstrual hygiene tools and education. With those definitions in hand, we were able to talk to folks whose work intersected with menstrual equity and period poverty across Georgia and align in our shared work. We've got a few of those logos here on the page today. These represent the folks that we spent time with building the coalition that first year. The types of organizations that we reached out to aren't limited to those on the slide, though. We reached out to folks that were affiliated with specific parties. We reached out to budget and policy research organizations, period supply groups, civil and human rights groups, research institutions, professional organizations, Girl Scouts, religious leaders, campus organizations, sororities, legislative caucuses, and just general women's groups. Now, we weren't successful with every one of them from the start, but those seeds definitely took root, and our coalition continues to grow to this day. I'm excited to show you some of the logos of our friends and partners that have joined us. And as of today, we are approaching 30 organizations as part of the Georgia STOMP Coalition. And we continue to grow. It's quite hard to keep these graphics current. With the growth in the number of folks who are part of the coalition, it was important that we created some sort of a digital footprint or a home so that folks could do research on our work and we could keep everybody posted. And so in true form, we built kind of a quick and dirty blog style website. It required that we formalize our language even further and helped us put faces to our work. We convened our second coalition summit where representatives of coalition member groups, legislators, and others discussed legislative and administrative ways forward to address the issues of menstrual equity and period poverty. Each person was asked to identify other groups who they knew could contribute to educating the public and stakeholders about menstrual equity and period poverty. But most importantly, we got buy-in from all of the groups on the 4 pillars of work officially. These pillars listed here were adopted at that November 2018 summit, and were well informed by the lessons we learned at the Alliance for Period Supplies Period Leadership Summit, as well as from the organizations who we were learning from across Georgia. In essence, we began referring to our work with a shorthand of 4 pillars, 3 of which focused on addressing access to period products in schools, prisons, and following a natural disaster or emergency, and then eliminating the state sales tax on menstrual products in Georgia.
Because HB 731 was introduced in the second year of Georgia's legislative biennial, it routinely died at the close of that session. In late fall of 2018, HB 8 was pre-filed. So that was our second tax elimination bill that was filed. Again, we had bipartisan sponsorship with male and female signers from various geographic locations in Georgia. We worked very hard to get media attention and were very successful at it that year. Truthfully, by the start of the session, Adele and I, who had not known each other before this entire process or this work began, were well acquainted with one another, learning from each other's work styles and spending hours on the phone each day. I kid that we were Zooming before Zooming was cool. But we had some fun too. In January of 2019, Sharon Champion of the hugely impactful Homeless Period Project, based in Greenville, South Carolina, with chapters all over South Carolina and expanding now into Atlanta, invited us to join her in meeting with a leading voice for menstrual equity that we mentioned earlier, Jennifer Weiss-Wolf. In Atlanta. Jennifer, who coined the term menstrual equity and is a national force in this movement, was coming to town for 2 reasons. They were discussing national strategies and trying to learn from Southern states, and to attend a fundraiser for Homeless Period Project at which the Indigo Girls were performing. So yeah, Adele and I were pretty psyched to have Amy Ray and Emily Salyers repping Georgia Stomp pins in every one of their pictures that night.
Getting organized, having fun and getting organized over that year helped us know where we needed to make additional connections, both in regards to geographic areas in the state where we needed to convince legislators of the importance of this work, but also in regards to focus areas that related to the umbrellas of menstrual equity and period poverty. And I want to note that we specifically tried to make a lot of connections outside of Atlanta because we wanted to recognize that the major metropolis in Georgia doesn't necessarily reflect the majority of the state. We also explored avenues of advocacy outside of the legislature. So I want to give a huge shout out to Representative Kim Schofield, with whom we worked to put together members of a study committee who could contribute research regarding access to products in schools. Our collective thought was that in order to get products where they needed to go, we would need to demonstrate that need locally first. So our focus was research. We were so lucky to be connected to 5 leading researchers in the area of menstrual health management and reproductive health throughout this work. Their contributions gave legitimacy to our work, as well as an evidence-based lens through which we crafted recommended best practices and policy. We also connected at that table with school officials, Department of Education officials, health educators, researchers at Georgia-based institutions, and then local advocates.
With two of the pillars, we discovered the speed and effectiveness of working with administrative officials to get things accomplished versus working through the legislative process. We were able to get GMA to align with FEMA with adding the list, adding period products to their list of basic needs following a natural disaster. Representative Buckner spoke with GMA Director Homer Bryson, and that decision was made administratively. It didn't require a legislative action. And similarly, following the passage of the First Step Act, which was a national law that was passed, the coalition began to investigate access in state prisons. The First Step Act says that period products will be available in Federal Bureau of Prison facilities on an as-needed basis. And very shortly after that, the Georgia Department of Corrections made the announcement that the products would be available without limits in state correctional facilities as well. These successes gave us credibility that led to the larger coalition and other state agencies being willing to work with us. So then, in what I think was one of the best moves that we've done to date, in February of 2019, we hosted a press conference in the rotunda of the Capitol to honor GMA Director Homer Bryson and Department of Corrections Commissioner Tim Ward, to highlight the work still to be done on the tax elimination issue and access for administrators in schools, and to collect products in the rotunda of the Capitol. These period products were donated to GMA for use following natural disasters. And I can tell you it was quite a hoot to watch all the pads and tampons come through the scanners and as they come into the Capitol and all. So that was a great day. We got great press coverage. Lots of elected officials walking through the rotunda observed us and became more aware of the work. And period poverty actually was beginning to be much better understood under the Gold Dome as a result of that day. The tax elimination campaign definitely caught the attention of statewide media, and we got a lot of coverage and more understanding about it as well. So when we got to the subcommittee meeting of the Sales Tax Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee to have our hearing on HB 8, we learned the meaning of a political hawk swooping in to take over a meeting. The most powerful woman in our state legislature, Speaker Pro Tem Jones, attended the hearing in her role as an ex officio committee member. She very quickly shot down the idea of the tax, focusing on the issue of elimination of period poverty, but ignoring the inequity and discriminatory nature of the tax. Many of our state leaders believe the amount of money that would be saved by each individual woman or menstruator doesn't justify the tax elimination. We believe that the tax is a form of gender discrimination, and that discrimination is not measured in dollars and cents. The state budget should not be balanced to the tune of around $9 or $10 million each and every year, primarily on the backs of women. But Speaker Pro Tem Jones turned to us and said, "I hear you in relation to girls in schools." Thanks to her backing and the work of coalition representatives and senators that year, money was added to the continuation budget, state budget, for the purchase of period products. $1 million for the Department of Education and $500,000 for the Department of Public Health. That was huge. It was a major victory for us. So at the end of that day, it was hard to know how to feel. We kind of had this feeling it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, because we knew that administrators in our school systems and in our community health departments were going to have products that they needed, but we really had not been heard and were greatly shut down on the tax elimination issue.
Yeah, writing our summary that year was a whirlwind of emotions, because when we looked back to summarize that 2019 legislative session, House Bill 8, the tax elimination bill, never got out of committee. We got great press, but found that we really needed to focus our message in order to get that across, that this is equity focused, this is discrimination focused. Georgia Department of Corrections became a national leader in on-demand menstrual product access, and that was a huge win. We, from there, decided to set our sights on focusing on local and county prisons next. Now, GMA, who had added menstrual products to the basic needs list like this, built relationships with other coalition members, like Helping Mamas, to help establish a supply chain that they could leverage in times of emergency. That was another huge win that we could celebrate. And then the money added for the Department of Education, Georgia STOMP, we were able to begin working hand in hand with state officials to recommend best practices on the distribution of these products, and even pull together some educational kits that could go out to school nurses. The money was added for the Department of Public Health, and we began to build a relationship there, receiving promises from DPH with the ability for checking in on progress mid-year to see how much money was being distributed. We were thrilled by this progress, but as we said, frustrated by the lack of a movement for the tax elimination campaign. Things had stalled. So at the third coalition summit in the spring of that year, we met with coalition members to discuss what could be done to change the status quo. We discussed how we could leverage different advocacy styles without losing our collective voice and power and messaging. And we're still trying to figure out how to use the many different voices that were at the table, but we're grateful to have so many voices that were interested in being at the table. Overall, we decided, let's maintain these 4 pillars of work, but note that with the progress in the emergency product access space, that we can move that to a kind of monitor status. We wanted to continue to work to change the status quo to drive forward the elimination of the sales tax, and definitely face some competing philosophies for achieving that goal, but recognize that we all wanted the same outcome. So again, in the summer and fall of 2019, we did an insane amount of networking and meeting. One of our favorite, Claire and I both agree, one of our favorite engagements was getting to go speak to a Girl Scouts troop. That was beyond fun to talk about how do you advocate and how do you build consensus? We realized that we needed to lightly formalize what it meant to be part of the coalition. And so we wanted Georgia STOMP to be a loose coalition, but recognize that there are different voices and priorities within our group, as is the nature of a coalition. So to define a recognizable brand, we wanted to have some sort of uniform presence in Georgia. We created a membership agreement that all groups are now required to sign, which provided messaging consistency and an operative framework for coalition members. While relationships with legislators were and are an incredibly important part of our work, we mindfully did not include them as coalition members, noting that separation allowed us to avoid priority conflicts and account for the differing philosophies of how to operate within the legislature. And then finally, accommodate some of the challenges that our advocates were having in speaking freely at the coalition summit tables in the presence of legislators.
In September of 2019, Adele and I were honored to join legal minds from throughout the country and other advocates at a legal action brainstorm session at Columbia School of Law, hosted by Jennifer Weisswolf and Laura Strausfeld, leaders of the national organization Period Equity. This lab was focused on how to end the discriminatory tax on menstrual products nationwide. Our experiences in Georgia gave a different perspective to those from the Northeast or California regarding what's possible in more conservative areas of our nation. In particular, Georgia's strong elected official immunity laws are a hindrance to some methods that are used in other states to eliminate the sales tax. One of our takeaways from that summit, and one of the things that our coalition members noted when we posted pictures of ourselves there, was how the attendees there were incredibly white. We had already been working hard to assure our coalition building was representative of all Georgians. It made us even more determined to examine every panel, leadership team, and board as we continued to move forward. So we entered 2020 with a lot of hope. HB8 was alive, and we had some indications that even though we weren't getting movement in the Ways and Means Subcommittee, that we might have support in getting it moved to another committee, and there might be some pathways through the legislature for that bill. The House honored us with a resolution recognizing Georgia STOMP's work. Leaders of both parties wore red in the House that day, and that was an exciting day to look down on the floor and see that. And relationships were building and we're strengthening with the Department of Education, the Georgia Association of School Nurses, such that in February of 2020, we were able to host a webinar for school nurses throughout the state. Working with the Georgia Association of School Nurses and the Department of Education, that webinar was meant to amplify the existence of funding in schools and talk about best practices for distribution. And we were able to elevate the work of 3 different areas of our state, counties who are leading the state in alleviation of period poverty in schools and have outstanding programs doing that. Prior to that event, we had surveyed school nurses about their knowledge of the funds that had been allocated by the legislature in the year before and how it was being distributed throughout the state. Surprisingly, there are school nurses who still don't believe that lack of products is a barrier for administrators attending class. They believe lack of products is poor planning on the part of those who believe. This survey with another conducted in early 2021 proved vital in our advocacy efforts in upcoming sessions regarding the level of funding for Department of Education and Department of Public Health. And we'll talk about that. But we came off of that day and the webinar. It was a well-attended event in the state. School nurses from all over the state attended, participated, asked great questions, and we felt like we were had gotten a lot of information out and that good things were happening.
Yeah, y'all know what comes next in this story. It's no surprise that then in early March, COVID really came to our front doors. And so there were changes as a result. One, House Bill 8 never received a committee hearing and subsequently died at the end of that biennial. The budget became the primary priority for the legislature and for us. And we, like everyone, had to learn new methods of advocacy. We also had to learn new methods of how we existed as an organization. So, for example, in the whirlwind of early June 2020, we had a new role as a coalition in being the connector between different coalition member organizations as the supply of products dwindled and the demand of products changed from area to area. And so organizations that supplied products in schools all of a sudden had to figure out, how do we get more products urgently? And then how do we get those products to students who aren't going to school? So Georgia STOMP as an advocacy organization really was standing on new ground at that point. Additionally, everything went virtual. And so we had our first virtual coalition member summit, which was a joy. You can see so many smiling faces there. We also expanded our footprint into educational events. And so marching towards menstrual equity was part and parcel to that newfound territory. In the fall of 2020, at our summit, we adopted a 5th pillar, which was education and public awareness about menstrual equity and period poverty. And this really harkens back to that conversation we had the year before about changing the status quo. In March of 2021, the town hall that is pictured here featured coalition leaders from across the state. And shout out again to Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Georgia. Amber Mack participated in her role as policy advisor, I think. She was a fantastic addition to that coalition meeting, and we were so grateful for the insights that she shared. Quick note that that video can still be found on our YouTube channel and is an excellent overview of perspectives and work underway by member organizations across Georgia. We also had a new initiative that came out of the Junior League of Douglas County, which pioneered the development of one of our most effective and entertaining public awareness and educational tools that we have to date. Candid conversations are virtual conversations about our collective lived experiences with menstruation. I cannot overstate how amazing these are. And quick plug, we're always happy to host more with the Junior League of Douglas County and anybody else who's interested. But it's surprising how fun it can be to come together and remember some of our most embarrassing and even painful moments. We've hosted these for coalition members, for organizational groups, even an evening with some of the legislators in the Georgia General Assembly. And some of the best have included women who didn't know each other before joining the Zoom, and ones that included a wide range of age groups.
And yes, in 2021, budget became everyone's priority. Following kind of this slide summarizes the ups and downs of the last few years with the budgeting process. Following the initial allocations of $1 million and $500,000 for DOE and DPH that we mentioned earlier, even pre-pandemic, the governor cut the entire state budget. You may remember this from the news, by 4% across the board. Even before any money was distributed in that FY 2020 budget. So shortly following on that austerity reduction, cuts to the state budget in the midst of the uncertainties about the pandemic were made in the FY 2021 budget. So only after having the monies 1 year in the budget, the legislature slashed the allocations for DOE, Department of Education, to $300,000. That's from the $1 million to $300,000. And they eliminated the Department of Public Health funding. We were devastated knowing that at a time when the need was greatest, the funding was removed. It also was very difficult to be informing school officials and trying to educate them about the existence of funding and to get them to spend it when the funding appeared uncertain and they weren't sure, about how to do it or if it was going to be there in the future. And of course, the Department of Public Health had very little time to spend on the purchase and provision of period products during a pandemic. Their priorities were understandably elsewhere. So we raised our voices loudly in the 2020 session, but felt like we were not heard. Because that's how the funding had remained, and we were not able to change that level. But when the governor released his mid-year AFY 21 budget, where he adds money back, he had added back $420,000 for the Department of Education. And we knew that our advocacy had been heard because we'd done direct advocacy to his office. Using those results of the school nurses that I spoke of earlier, and meeting with Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, who is a strong advocate for the money for schools, and speaking before the Education and Health subcommittees and the appropriation process, we were able to get monies put back in the budget. And we are celebrating that in FY 2022, the current budget that's currently underway, $1.25 million has been allocated for schools. And we were successful in restoring the Department of Public Health line item, even though it had been eliminated, to put it back into the budget. We continue to work with DOE to follow that funding, to train nurses, to educate them about its presence and what it can be used for. We are so grateful for the connection and the working relationship we have with DOE as far as getting feedback on where the money is spent and what areas of the state are you able to use it and who might need more information about it. And we are now the pandemic is easing somewhat, are working stronger on establishing those same kind of relationships and have been successful with the Department of Public Health. So what's next for Georgia STOMP? We are in the midst right now of a lot of organizational changes. At our spring summit this year, the coalition decided to formalize and file for 501c3 status, which we have done. An inaugural board was chosen. You're seeing the members of that board here, officers elected, bylaws finalized, all of those type of things. We have updated our membership agreement recently, refreshing our logo, getting a new website. Dale talked earlier about how we threw up the blog one a few years ago. It's a very exciting time for Georgia STOMP. We're growing as a coalition, and new groups are approaching us every month, and some are joining. We've realized these issues that we're facing are not going to be resolved immediately. And we want some longevity and stableness to this work in Georgia. It's just too important to have it be continue to be strictly grassroots. So what's next for the work? Our twice a year summits continue. At our fall 2021 summit, we'll hear from member organization leaders about what they want to focus on in the 2022 session coming up. Using that input, the board will set our priorities and publish them soon. Healthy mothers, healthy babies are a part of that, our coalition, and we'll get that information, and hopefully you'll be able to see it distributed through there. We've got additional efforts underway. We have been working to bring together advocates, researchers, administrators from the different departments we've talked about, and legislators to prioritize research needs around menstruation in Georgia. And we've held a couple of different what we've called research roundtables to have conversations about that. And we're now working to put together and prioritize a list of research needs. We're working with member group to explore provision of products to those experiencing homelessness. What policy changes or advocacy might assist in this area? What are the needs? We're looking at that. We will continue to ensure prisons and jails follow policies and work with local officials to assure those the needs of those who are incarcerated are met. Following up on a policy that's been put in place and making sure of how it's working and what issues of it is a part of it. It is part of our work at the state level. And with Georgia having 159 counties and local jails and municipalities with facilities, there's a lot of work to be done at the local level to ensure the needs of menstruators are met. We'll continue to work with school officials and legislators to eliminate the lack of period products as a barrier to learning. That is not something that is just too important, and we're getting too much feedback from nurses that it's making a difference in the lives of students in our state, and that's very gratifying. And sales tax elimination. We are Georgia Stop tax on menstrual products. In this past legislative session, another bill, HB 810, was filed late last year. We did that after we secured the funding for schools and community health departments, and that bill is still alive in the 2022 session coming up. And the discriminatory nature of the tax and its elimination will be a focus for Georgia Stop until we accomplish it. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to answer some of your questions in a few moments. If you want more information here about Georgia Stomp and our work, if your group might be interested in joining the coalition, if you have a group of friends and want to host a candid conversation, this is our contact information. Get in touch with us, and we will continue to build this coalition and strengthen the voice for menstrual equity in the state of Georgia.
Thank you so much for your time. We can't wait for your questions.